Hello everyone, welcome to the next section of SAP Basis Training. In this session we will be discussing about SAP System Traces, meaning to say what are all kind of traces which can help you as a basis consultant in order to analyze some issues or in order to analyze some performance in the SAP system. There is quite different kinds of traces which is available. First of all, we need to also analyze if there is any errors, and also we need to know where these files are being saved. We seen some trace files in our previous sessions. When you are starting up the SAP system, how we can use this trace in SAP, but this trace which we are talking about is the trace within SAP system. Okay, this is different. And here we also need to know where these trace files are being saved, because some cases, as I said before, if suppose you enable some trace file, but somehow you forgot to disable the trace file, and many of these trace files are raw files which is going to be saved in your operating systems. So if in case if you forgot to disable this trace files, and this is going to increase quite a lot, in that kind of situations you should know where these trace files are being saved. If you wanted to move to different places, you can move it to different places. So this trace file is also very important, as well as we need to know the locations, also quite important in some cases we want to diagnose some issues. Okay, these are all the trace functions or trace transaction codes which presently available inside the SAP ABAP system. First one is that SM12. It's a system log. In this, using this system log, you can determine and correct errors that occurs in the SAP system in the SAP environment, like in the ABAP environment. Every application server has a local log that contains the messages that outputs from this specific system, that is SM21. We will see how this is working. And the next one is ABAP short dump. This is ST22. If let's say if you have some unexpected errors in the program while running the program, then it's called a short dump. It will give you a dump what something is went wrong, and so we can find out what went wrong with this short dumps. And we also have this ST01, which is basically a trace analysis. Using this trace analysis, you can actually trace kind of authorization and different kind of traces like database, RFC calls, like this you can trace and find out what happens. And these trace files, for example, this is a little bit different from the ABAP short term. This ST01 you need to enable to trace. Yeah, the system logs and short term analysis is by default. If something is going to happen, something is happening in the system, it automatically record this system logs. Or short term is, again, if anything goes wrong, it automatically gives you the dump. It's saved in the system. You can go back and review it. But ST01 is something which you need to enable if you wanted to trace. The other two are logs. This is trace. You need to enable this trace for the specific functions. And ST05 is a performance trace. The performance trace, you can trace the SQL trace. Basically, in the performance trace, you can really see what happening in the database level, or what kind of calls you called, and it's very detailed trace, the performance trace. And ST11 is a developer trace. We have slightly seen in our previous sections how was the developer trace is being used in our initial sessions of starting up the trace files, setting up the trace files. But however, we will see more detail here. Maybe we can go one by one and see what is this trace file means. First trace file is the system log trace files. Using this trace file, any event or a problem are recorded in the local application server. That means each application server in their system log of the specific system. Meaning to say, this specific trace is being saved into the local file of the specific SAP application system. You can see here USR SAP, the SID, then it's systems, then you have the log, then you have this is the name of the file. Okay, yes, log, then instance number. With this you can save this. But if you see in Unix system, it will be a different path, it will be under SID, then sys, then global, then slog j.log. That will be a different log in Unix, but Unix works in a different concept. Here you can see volt file and the present file. This is differentiated a little bit here. So volt log will be transferred here. This is a new log. The Unix, what happens is you can have central logging system. Okay, if you have different application server, you can log all the events which happens in the system in a central log. Then you can transfer using the parameters, same like this, like these parameters. In Unix you have different parameters. You configure this log with which server you need to be which server this needs to be transferred, which is a central server, and what is the time period you want to transfer these logs. So based on these parameters, it will automatically transfer these logs to the central location. That is available in Unix, but it's not available in actually in Windows. Windows is like it's quite simple actually in Windows. Yes, we can look into our SAP systems how this system log can be used. Our SAP system, let's log into our SAP system. SM21. This is a system log. Here what we can do is we can read the data from specific date, from to date, or you can also read the data for specific users. And if you wanted to see the transaction based logs, you can see the transaction and SAP process and process numbers. And here main thing is like you can also differentiate by problems only, problems and warnings, and all messages. Okay, so let's say right now today from morning 00, say read system log. You can see quite number of system log. Here you can see the time and the type. This dialog means dialog. It's a message server, dispatcher, then work process, dispatcher. Like this you have quite a lot of information. So if you double click on one, then it gives you the details what is happened. But this is not an error. You can see here priority is green, just a warning message for us. So it's really not a problem. If you can see here the operation mode, it says the operation mode switch to the operation day is triggered. That means we in our previous sessions we configured operation mode, so the system is automatically doing the operation mode change is also been logged. So any changes which happens in the system is automatically logged here. Okay, and we can also see some errors. Runtime raise exception error. So this gives you the detail of what is the exception. This is not a good example. Let's take some another error maybe. Let's say only the problems only. Let's say I will start from a different date, from 15. Okay, we have different logs. You can see operating system call failed. It says in this particular date an operating system call receive failed, that it couldn't call the operating system call. Okay, and what time it is been reported, what is the process which reports this error, and what could be the problems. From this detail of the specific log, it will helps you to narrow down your analysis to a specific place. So you need to really read this document. A specific operating system call was written with an error, the communication. So it looks like additional specification error number. Okay, WSE connect set. We have technical detail, function mode. Okay, so it looks like the operating system call, the OS call did not respond for the SAP. Okay, maybe some problem with the system. So it's not critical actually, because it's not coming. It came in only one specific time. After that it didn't happen. That means the operating system, the Windows itself should have corrected the specific errors in the operating system. So after that's what did not happen. So like this you can actually drill down to specific issues, and it also has all this detailed problems and warnings only. You can also see all messages, all system logs from this, whether it is error or it's okay or warning, everything you can see. Quite a lot of logs. These are all the warning ones. If it is yellow means it's warning, okay, and red means it is an error, okay. This is system log. Here you have, this is a standard system log. This is a standard view, that means a normal view. If you go here and you have an expert mode, if you use the export mode, you can select the attributes, what kind of logs you are going to looking for, what packages you had the problem, which terminal we had the problem. This is also quite important. If let's say which terminal you had the problem, or you can also narrow down the program wise, which program we had these problems and which program reported these problems. Like this you can use the expert mode. Here also you can go by the transaction by in standard, and or also by the users. It's quite useful. This is on expert mode. To see the log file where it is being saved, you can go to environment and you say display SAP parameters. Here it will give you where these log files are being saved. For us, the log files is saved here, central log file. So if you go to our operating system, go to USR SAP, then go to our SID ECC, this is the local file. This is not the one which we are going to looking for, because this is applicable for Unix. Yeah, if you go to sys and global slogj, and you don't have the particular file, that means this is not an Unix system, so we don't have that. Okay. So since it's an Windows systems, and we will use this parameter. Okay, in the Unix we will use this parameter where it will describe where this is been saved. In Windows we will use this parameter. Okay, so we go to this location, ECC dev log, then we go to logs. You can see this file. This is the current file. Okay, and this is the OS level. This is the same information what we have seen in our the other screen, but it's in raw file. Okay, here it is saved, but here is quite difficult to read this one. So instead we can read this information inside SAP. Okay, this is quite easy. And now what we are seeing is we are seeing the log file for this specific system, the specific instance where we logged in. Okay, for specific application server we logged in, and this application server, these log files can be different from one application to another application. So if you want to see the different log file, you go here, meaning to say if you want to see the log file of a different application server, then you need to select that specific application server. For that you need to go to system log, go to choose, then you say now right now you are in local mode. If you say remote system log, okay, then you can see the instance name here. Okay, if you select here, then it will give you all the instances which is available in this particular SAP system. Okay, and it says generic selection value ending star is allowed. That means if you want to select all the system which start with ECC, then you can say ECC star. Okay, because many of the basis related fields, some fields, this star will not be allowed. In that places you can see this kind of messages that this is not allowed. Okay, because inside the database is very easy to query, but if it is you are querying from a raw file and all this thing, the program logic may be little bit complicated. I believe that could be the reason. So here this is allowed, or you can also select the specific instance by selecting like this, specific instance. So now it comes to your mind, okay, if let's say I have 7-8 instances, I wanted to see the system log, what happens then? Do I have to go each and every instance and search? No, you don't need to do that. You can go drill down to specific instances if the number of logs is quite high. Otherwise you can select by star. Otherwise you can go here, system, choose and say all remote system logs. So when you select this one, then it will read all the system logs. Okay, if you go and select say only the local system log, then it will take only the local analysis of that specific server which you have logged in. So if you select, go and choose all remote, then it will say analysis of all remote instances. That means including this instance, it will analyze all instances. Okay, this will be the default selection for this particular system log analysis. Okay, then you can also specify the date, from which date to which date, then you can execute. This is very useful analysis, this system log. Many a times whenever you want to find what happened in the system, the first place as a basis consultant should go to system log, because the system log have very good information, detailed information about this. And please also monitor the system log size. When it is getting older, then it will move it to the older file. Then you need to see how much the system log is growing. If it is a system is big and it's growing very fast, in that cases you need to archive these raw files. Okay, this is about the system log. The next analysis tool which we are going to see is ABAP runtime environment short-term analysis. This short-term analysis, how it happens is, let's say if you are running an ABAP program or running a transaction code, if there is some error happens during the execution of the program, then it will give you an ABAP runtime, ABAP short-term. You may think whether this program is maybe this program is written incorrectly. No, it's not the case. It cannot be written as a coding incorrect, meaning to say when you are developing an ABAP code, if the syntax of the particular program is wrong, by the time when you are developing, when you are compiling, when you are activating, when we see in our previous sections, when you are creating the program, you activate the program. During the activation time, it checks the syntax of each statement what you have written in the ABAP code. So unless you correct the syntax, then you cannot go to the next levels. Anyway, you will check it in the quality system. The error could be a logical problem. Let's say you are supposed to search for one specific document in somewhere, but that time when you are running the program, the document does not exist in that particular location. This could be a logical error. Okay, that time it can give you a short dump, or some another specific reason, logical reasons like that. In that cases, it gives you an dump, which these dumps have a lot of details, whereas to identify what is the actual problem, why this has been terminated. By default, this dump is saved in the database, and it does not save as a raw file in the operating system. This is quite important, because this dump has quite a lot of details and it keeps saving in the database, and the database will increase and it saves in a table called SNAP snap. We will see that in the system, and this table will be keep increasing the more dumps you have. normally as a basis consultant, as our day-to-day activity, we check the short dumps, how many short dumps it's coming. And you go and just have a review of all the short dumps and see if is anything abnormal is coming. If there is something abnormal, then we need to fix that. This is quite important because first of all the system consistency, and secondly if the more short terms you have, your this database is going to be increased and it's going to create a lot of inconsistency in the system. So as a basis consultant, this is also one of the main tasks, to go and check the short dumps. Okay, let's go back to our system and see in our system. Okay, the transaction code to check short dumps is ST22 ST22. Okay, here you can search the short dump. For the standard shortcuts, it says today's and yesterday's. Normally we do this one, we just go and check today's and yesterday's short dumps for a quick check. Or you can also specify the date and specify which host you are wanted to check, work process, user, client, and you have quite a lot of selection criteria. Okay, let's say I wanted to check today's short dump. We have only 2 short dumps today. You can see here we have only 2 short dumps. Some race exceptions is actually the big issue. It's all race exceptions. It's all race exceptions. Then let's open any one of these. If you see here, you have a lot of information in this particular screen. So each short term, right now we have only one kind of short term, so we couldn't really further drill down what is the actual issues in the systems. So we have only one. This race exception is basically is not a problem. It's basically is an RFC calls errors. Okay, there is try to do an internal RFC calls which can give an error. Okay, this is not a real problem. So what happens is in the short term you have different different errors, quite a lot of data here. And first main thing is what we need to understand is this short term can happen in different situations. Let's say first situation is it's called internal error. We don't have that one right now. Internal error means it's a error in the SAP kernel itself. Okay, in that cases you need to go and search in the OSS and say that with this specific errors is already reported by SAP, then they will tell you you upgrade this kernel package to a new level, then you will upgrade it to a different level. Okay, that is internal error. This is basically should be fixed by SAP, we can say. Then the next one is installation and the environment error or resource error. This is in terms of, let's say, if the database is not accessible for some reason for a specific period, or this can give you a short dump. That's an internal error, or any database problems can be an internal error. This basically we need to fix it because of some missing resources. And you will have an application error. Application error is the most you can see in the short terms. This can be caused by some resources, as I said, some documents which is not available, or some field which is incorrect in some of the data which you received from an external system or something like this. Yeah, this can have a lot of errors based on applications. Okay, and if you see here, it has quite a lot of informations. If these application errors should be fixed by us, let's say in general, but if let's assume that we cannot fix these errors, then we will raise this issue to SAP. That time it's quite easy. You can simply download the short term and send it to SAP. Then it's quite easy to analyze, or you can tell them, okay, this date, this particular time, and this is the short term which was created. Then they can access your SAP system remotely, and they will try to analyze what is the short term, because this has all the details. If you say the system environment, if you go to system environment, it has all the details, which system, what is the system environment, what is the database you are using, all details you have. Then you have use and transaction. Then you have user and transaction, which is the user who called, what is the transaction it was called, and what happened, what can you do, basically what to fix an error, what you can do. It also gives you the detail of how to fix an error. Normally a lot of errors you can get the detail very nicely here. And above developer view, then for the above developer error analysis, you have lot of informations here. And you can also directly go to your source code, where you can find out what happened to this one. If you simply click there, it will come to the specific source code, and you can read the source code. It's very useful analysis. In the short term, you can very easily identify it. Let's say if we cannot fix it, then you will raise it to SAP. You can also download this short term directly from here to a local text file and send to them. Otherwise, best idea is to give them the remote access, then they can analyze it very nicely. Okay, so this short term, again, as I said, this short term is saved in the table called /sc16 snap snap. Go here, this is the table which saves this information, but this table may have quite a lot of entries. Right now we have only 1100 something, but if in a bigger system it will be huge. Okay, so because this have so much of information, yeah. By default, the short term is saved in the system for 28 days, which is quite a lot. 28 days also quite a lot. That can have a lot of it can occupy quite a lot of space in this particular snap table. But you can reorganize this table. You can delete the entries from this table. If you go to reorganize, yeah, here you can select, if you wanted to delete the entries more than 7 days, then you select the specific date and reorganize. Then it will delete the old entries, because it's no point in keeping if there is no issue in the system, or if you already fixed it. And it will automatically reorganize anyway after 28 days. But 28 date also quite sometime is going to be quite big for some bigger systems, so it's better to reorganize. And sometime you will also have problems with these ones. Let's say you had a major problem, there was a lot of short term in one specific date, and this table occupied quite a lot of information. That time reorganization may not work, it may fail. That time you need to delete these entries using SC14. If you go to, there's a transaction, you can do a reorganization of the table. Okay, SC14. If you go to SC14, it's a transaction code. But please don't do this one in a situation if you do not really need to do anything here. You don't need to do this, it's a database level. If you go to edit, here you can say delete all the database table. You can say delete the database table. So it will delete the database table. When you start it again, it will automatically recreate this table, and you can redo the whole thing again. So if in case this got stuck, okay, this particular table could not be reorganized, then you do this. Otherwise, please don't do anything, because this is a very sensitive transaction code where you can create indexes and all these things. But you can also do in the background, you can only delete the data instead of deleting the table. Just adjust the data, then it will do, it will delete the data, then it will not delete the table. That will be the best idea to do it. Please don't delete the table, you just delete the data in the table, then it will adjust and remove the entries from the table, then you can start from fresh. That is one thing which we need to remember, and the best way is that you keep doing the reorg. Yeah, that is the best thing to do. And as a basis consultant, at least once in a day you go to this transaction and see how many short dumps you have. And generally in a bigger system you will have short dumps like 100 200 short dumps. It's normal in many cases, like these receptions and some authorization missings, some timeouts. Let's say you have in a SAP system, you can configure some ideal times in the parameters. Let's say I logged into the systems right now, and you cannot keep the system alive for specific user forever for the security reason, because they can leave the system unattended, then somebody else can use the system. That's a problem. So for security reasons, what we do, we have a parameter, the ideal time. Once the for example 10 minutes or something, when the 10 minutes pass, then it automatically locks you off, it automatically terminates. This kind of situations also will be logged as a short dump, because timeout error, it gives you a timeout error. That kind of problems we can simply eliminate, because we know what is the timeout error means, so we can simply eliminate that one. So you need to go and check and see what are all these things. So if it is something which is abnormal, then we need to go and fix that one. Okay, so please go and check this. It is very important that the basis consultant monitors this short dump. The next utility which we are going to see is system trace. It's a very useful tracing mechanism. You can, using this tool, using this transaction, you can trace quite a lot of things. You can trace authorization check, you can trace the kernel function, you can say the general kernels, and generally we will use authorization check tracing and the database tracing, SQL tracing, and the database buffer trace and the RFC call trace. That means, and the table buffer trace. This is also quite useful, and you can see what are all the things which is getting buffered in the table. RFC calls trace. RFC call trace is very important, because what you are going to call, or what the remote function call, what is being executed in the system, can be traced from this transaction. And the lock operation, the lock operation is our NQ operation. We know already what is NQ operation. We can also see the lock operation, what are the objects being locked, or what is the lock operation behind each program. This also we can trace. So you have multiple usage of this specific system trace. So basically you are going to do a trace, and the system trace again saved in the raw file in the systems. So it is very important that once you start the system trace, and you need to go and stop the system trace. You can see here trace on and trace off, so you have to do this one. And you can also filter the trace for specific users. That will be a better idea, to filter the specific user, so that you don't occupy the entire space. Otherwise, if you don't filter it by users, it is going to trace the entire user and entire operation. Let's say if I say authorization check, we are tracing and trace it on. If let's assume you have 100 users in the system, it's going to trace all the 100 users. So it's better to filter it by the users. That will be a best idea. And we can also configure actually to have this specific trace file. What is the minimum size, what is the maximum size. If the maximum size is reached, then it will create an additional file. Okay, that will be the better idea, to have additional files is created, because then you can archive the old files. Okay, that is system trace. Let's go get into our system, then we can see how does the system trace works. To start the system trace, you need to go to transaction ST01. So this is the system trace. Here you can enable authorization check and the database access, that is SQL trace, and table buffer, and lock entries, lock operations, and RFC calls. If you go to edit and go to the filter and say shared, here you can say you can filter the trace by process, or by specific users, or by transaction, or by programs. Okay, you have quite a lot of selections here to filter it. So it's better to filter to a specific program or specific transactions, then it's easy for you to minimize the number of trays you are going to run in this specific system. Okay, and here you can see the administration, where you can administer the trace, what trace if you wanted to have, maximum file size, how many megabytes you can have, and if it is more than that, then it will add an additional trace file. If you can see right now the current number of trace file is only 1. Now if you done, once it reaches this particular size, then it will create the second trace file. It automatically does this, so that when you can see the what is the active trace file, then you can remove the ones and you can archive and do some activity there. Now let's see how to trace the systems. First, let's take the example of authorization trace. So for this activity, let's create one more user. Maybe that may be quite easy to understand. So I'll copy this SAP basis. If you click that copy button, so the user is created in the transaction code SU01. I'll copy this user SAP basis. If you select this, it's for copy, say SAP test. So I selected all the values from the user SAP basis to SAP test, and say copy, accept the address, and I will put a password. Okay, the address is fine. Let's save it. Let's log in with the same user, that user which we have created. As you see, whenever you log in first time, it will ask you to change the password. So I change the password. So right now we have two users, the SAP test and this is SAP basis. Okay, let's go to ST01. Let's start with our first check. Let's say right now we want to restrict using filter shared. You can do that, but anyway in our system we don't have so many users. I will say select authorization check, and once you wanted to trace one specific functionality, what you do is you come here and select the specific tracing component which you want to trace. Let's say in our case it's authorization check. Once you select that, say trace on. Now you can see the trace switched on by this user. Okay, now I go to this user. This user is the one which you wanted to trace. I'm going to run a transaction code PFCG. This is to create roles. Then this is the role which we have created yesterday. Just did some operations. Let me go back here. Okay, now we did some operations. Let's see. We came out. We come back here. Now still the trace is on. Okay, now we set the trace off. So the trace is off. Now we wanted to see what happened in this particular time, what this user executed, what is the trace result. To analyze the trace result, you go to analysis. Here you need to specify the username, which username you wanted to check, that is SAP test. This is the user. Right now it anyway traced all the users. Then you can filter it by all the user, otherwise you can put star, but I want to check only the SAP test, and you need to specify the time. Okay, let's say 00 to 23, the full day. We did not anyway traced a lot of things today. For this user, it's a new user. Let's say start reporting. So now you can see here the user SAP test first started the transaction code. S underscore T code means it's an object to say transaction code, PFCG, and it checked some authorization object. These are all the authorization object which is required to run the transaction code PFCG. This is authorization checks. We will come to that topic later. What is authorization checks? Each transaction code have its own authorization object. What you can do within the transaction code is controlled by authorization objects. These are all being traced. So what all the authorization object required and checked during the execution of the transaction code PFCG is being traced here. So we can find it out from here. What is the authorization they have? If they don't have some authorization, this return code will be 1. Now it says 0 means they have this authorization. If it is 1 means they don't have this authorization. Like this we can identify if some user does not have some authorization. We can identify using ST01. Okay, the next one is, let's see the SQL trace. Okay. And one more thing we need to remember, that this particular trace which we are doing for this only this specific application server. Okay, we do not have a mechanism to centrally monitor this trace. This applicable only to that specific server, because this trace also a raw file which saved in the local file, and this is also going to be quite big. So if you want to enable trace using ST01, you need to log into that specific server where the user is working. Otherwise you need to switch on the trace in all the system, all the application servers. Then only you will get the exactly what is happening in the system. Instead, you can go to the specific application server where the particular user, this SAP test is running, then you can execute from there. So how do you switch between the servers? You go to SM51, which we seen in our previous session. Go to SM51. Let's assume if you have another server, then you select that particular application server and just double click there. Just double click there, then it will automatically change to the particular server. You can see that here. Right now we have only one, then so we just use this one. Okay, right, then we will see the SQL trace. Let me switch on the trace again. I selected SQL and say switch on the trace. I go back to this user. Maybe I will go to the same PFCG and change something. I did some changes here. Then I go to SU01. I go to the same user, my own user, did something here, some activity we did. Okay, now that activity is finished. Now we wanted to find what was the SQL trace, what is the database access for the specific activity what we have done. Okay, let me switch off the trace. So always switch off the trace before start analyzing. Before start analyzing the issues. So go to analysis. Let's say SAP test. This is the one which we wanted to check now. 00 to 23. Always check the time which you have traced. Right now we just put for the full day because we do not have much activity there. Otherwise it may be a little bit confusing. Okay, this is our old trace for the authorization. Yeah, if you go down, you can see the trace of this specific activity what we have done. These are all the object, this are navigation index, this object, these are all the basically these are all the tables which was used during the execution of PFCG. Let's say if you take this one, agr underscore define, this is a table. If you open one more session, if you go to SC16, if you put that name here, see this is a table. Okay, so it called this particular table, and after that it did something, because right now we are just checking the database what all the table it's calling. So then it called another table, USR12, USR agr underscore text, different table it called. Here also you can see what was done here, the return code in each tables. If you see, it's quite a lot of information. It did quite a lot of things. Then it's finished. Okay, this is how to trace the SQL trace database access. We can also trace like this table buffer, and we can just check the lock operations, the NQ operations. Okay, trace on. Go back to the not this one. This is the user SAP test. Okay, let's see PFCG to the same. At the time when I am opening, this particular table should be locked, or particular record should be locked. So let me do the same thing again. Go to SU01 for this user. I will move this and save it. Let's see what all the NQ is done during this operation. Trace off. Go to analysis. Sap test. Okay. NQ should be in the down. Yeah. You can see this was the end of our previous analysis. You can see this program. This is the object which was NQ. This is NQ which was locked. This is the object again. You can see the NQ lock again. In the USR04 is the table, and some rows which was locked. So you can see the operations which has happened during that particular activity, what we did in the PFCG and SU01. Like this you can trace this one. In general, for basis we will use only the authorization trace if you have some issues with the security and all these things. Other things are used generally by developers, but if you are really wanted to see what is going on in the system, you can still use this trace file and check that. But for us, main thing is that you need to make sure that the system trace files are maintained properly, and so that the system is not getting overloaded, so that so that the files are kept files are backed up properly, so that the operating system have enough space. If you have seen the previously, we had the size was quite small. Now if you can see, it's quite big now. So this is a raw file which will be saved in the operating system. If you go to operating system log, then this is the trace file right now which we are working on. This is a trace file. If you can open with the notepad, so it's this we cannot read it from here. We can interpret this, but it's quite difficult, so it's easy to read from the SAP. The next trace is called performance trace. This is also similar to our system trace. Here you can also trace the SQL trace, NQ trace, RFC trace, and table buffer trace. This will be mainly used by development team, or we can say it is integrated into our ABAP development workbench, and so that the difference between the system trace and the performance trace is more detailed. You can see the statements and how it's been executed in the performance trace in more detail. Okay, the system performance trace is executed using the transaction code ST05. Then you can activate this particular traces. Let's see now the system. So we start the trace using the transaction code ST05. Okay, so you can see here you have the buttons here: activate the trace, with filter, without filter, or deactivate the trace, stuff like this. Let's say, for example, let's trace SQL trace. Let's say activate the trace. You can see SQL trace is activated for user SAP basis. Let me do some activity. SU01 or PFCG. Okay, we did some operations. Now if you go to ST05 and say deactivate the trace, now you select display trace for SAP basis. Now here you can see it called the object USR02. USR02 is a table. Then select mandate, this means client, and the B name is the username SAP test. Then it started executing all the statement. You can see very detailed what the particular operation did. Okay, insert, you can also see many insert commands here. Insert some values in PFCG with this role. Then we select some commands and insert something, some characters here. You can see a very detailed report what this particular program did. That is the main difference between performance analysis and the system analysis. System analysis give you the detail of object what you just changed. What you did inside will not be there. So if you wanted to have a detailed analysis, then you do the performance analysis. This kind of analysis generally done for system performance tuning, as well as if you really could not find out what is this program exactly doing, then we can do this kind of tracing in order to drill down the issues in the SAP systems. Next one is developer trace. This we already seen in our previous session. How does the developer trace work? This is activated using SM50, which we already know, and this is saved in the operating system level, as well as we can also view this one from the SAP itself. So we know how to check in operating system level, but let's see how we can view this in the SAP. If you go to transaction code ST11, then here you can see all the developer trace logs as a file as such in the operating system. Let's say I wanted to see the developer trace, this one, just simply click. Now you can see the raw file. Basically this is a raw file which is in the operating system OS level, which we can see it here. Okay, this is more, it gives you more visibility than opening in the operating system, because it's more easy to read it out here, because it has the details which is clearly mentioned in here. That is developer trace. Okay, that is, we can view this developer trace using the transaction code ST11, ST11. Back to presentation. Okay, with this we are coming to the end of this session. Thank you very much for listening. I will see you in the next session. Bye bye.